Hello and welcome back to another VMK in the game development series. In this VMK, we'll begin modifying our existing game engine to get it prepared for use with the scene graph. In a previous VMK, I sort of give you an introduction of what to expect in the scene graph. Well, now let's go into our code and start making manipulations to really get ready for the code that will allow us to use the scene graph. The first major difference that we're going to have to implement is moving our player class. Currently, if we take a look inside of our GameOGL, you notice that at the very bottom here, we have the player class is associated with the GameOGL class. Well, it makes things a lot easier if we go and move this player out of the GameOGL class and put them directly inside of our scene class here. And so we'll do just that, and we're going to put them as a private member. Let me just clean up some of this here. We'll just put them at the bottom for now as an object. So the player himself will be an object inside the scene. And this makes a lot more sense because you can imagine that the player could have objects associated with him which will allow the scene graph to attach things to the player. So for instance, you can attach a weapon to the player, you can attach a vehicle to the player, and then as we move the player, those vehicles will move with them. Whereas if we had the player back inside game class, we wouldn't be able to take those advantages with us. So we would have to write code to wrap and attach things to other objects. So it makes a lot more sense to put the player inside of the scene like so. Now, this one little change is going to take this entire VMK to correct to get our engine to build and run again, believe it or not. There's quite a few links inside GameOGL here that we need to remap into our scene so that we can access our player, which is located now in here. The first thing we're going to do, though, is go inside our core.h file. And inside here, you'll notice we created an enumeration called movement. And this enumeration gets used inside GameOGL .cpp. Let's open that up. Anytime we wanted to move the player. So for instance, let's see, GameOGL, and let's take a look under handle mouse. So here, whenever we move the mouse, we called mPlayer and move, and then we passed in a bunch of parameters. Or if you press on the keyboard, we've called mPlayer crouch and so on, or move, or whatever. Well, we no longer have mPlayer inside of our GameOGL, so we need to call our scene to update the player's movement. To do this, we need to go into our scene and create some functions to allow us to move and crouch and all that other stuff. But to keep things simple, instead of breaking things up into, let me go back into here. Notice that here we've created a function called move, we created another one called jump, and we created another one called crouch. Instead of breaking things up the way we've done it here, we're going to group all three of these items into one function call. So inside of this function here, we can then call that one function call, and we'll call it action, and that will apply a certain action to the player. And we can specify what action by passing in an enumeration. And this is going to work very similar to how we've done it here with the move right, move left, but we're actually going to associate also the jumping and the crouching. So that's why we need to go into the core.h file here and change this movement. Okay, so let's delete this movement enumeration and replace it with action. And now you see, inside action, we have exactly the same thing we had before. Move forward, move back, move left, move right, look left, look right, look up and look down. But now we've also added jump, crouch down, and stand up. And all of these actions are going to be used by the new class, or sorry, the new function, which we're going to write for our scene.h file here. So let's go ahead and do that. If we go, we want to make it a public function. So underneath clear all here, let's just put all these functions that we're going to have to go and replicate. So we have player action, and we're going to specify what kind of action and then pass in a delta time. We also have player update, player get angle X, player get angle Y, and player get position. Oh, I noticed position is spelt wrong. Okay. So all of these we're going to go and have to implement. So let's start off with player action. Now, player action and all these other functions are really going to be easy to implement because we already have all the required functions that we need inside of our player class to, for instance, jump, to update him, to crouch, and whatever. So what we're just going to be doing inside player action is calling the individual functions here that we need to use. So let's go into scene.cpp. And right underneath clear all, let's put the player action stuff. Okay, so with player action, we pass in an action and the delta time. And if it's a movement action, so we're moving forward, back, left or right, or we're looking left, right, up or down, we're just going to call mPlayer and pass in the action into the move. With jump, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to call the jump function. And with crouch down or crouch up, we're going to call the appropriate crouch calls with the either down or up parameter passed in here. So that's what player action will do. We need to go and rewrite the move, the jump, and the crouch, or actually just the move, because now instead of getting a movement passed in here as an enumeration, we're passing in an action. So actually, let's go ahead and do that before I forget. Let's go under player. And under, where is it? Sorry, it's not under player, it's under camera. So under camera, let's go replace this with movement to action. And making that change will also require us to go into the CPP file and make the change in here as well. So we got action, and we're going to be switching based on the action. And since we renamed everything to be the same as before, we don't really need to make any changes here. Let's save all that. And let's work our way back up to over here. Okay, so we have the move handled now. We have jump, doesn't change. Crouch stays the same. Next we have player update, and all we're doing is passing in the time value that we get into the player's update function that is going to be called automatically. With player get angle X, we just call the player's get angle X and return that. Same thing with the angle Y. And lastly, player get position, we just call the player's get position function. So all of that is just like a very easy way to pass in the values from the player out of the scene so that we can then use it inside GameOGL. Now, because we made all those changes, we need to now go into here, and anytime we had a function that called mPlayer to do something, we now have to go and instead call the scene's new functions we just wrote to do the exact same thing. Okay, so that should be all the changes we need to make now. Notice now we called our scenes player action function, and we pass in exactly the same thing what we had before. So there's all the actions for movements, and then we have the action for jumping, spacebar, and the action for crouching. So we pass in crouch down as well as stand up. We also have to make the similar changes down here in hand the mouse. So we'll just replace these two with the following. And again, we're passing in the exact same thing. Instead, though, we're just calling player action here. Okay, and now down here under game update, under update game, we also had mPlayer here to call update. So instead of doing this, we now rewrite it. So we'll just highlight this, and we replace it now with player update being called from the scene. Okay, so those are all those changes. Let's build, and I'm sure that there's something we've missed. Okay. All right. We had the player state stored here under player.h. I actually renamed the crouch states here, so I'm just going to go and replace this for the player state and the crouch state to the new values that we're currently using in now. Instead of crouch state down and crouch state up, where I just have CS down and CS up. Let's see if that makes a difference. Okay. Player get position is not a member of scene. Let's just take a look here under scene.h. Player get position. Okay, that looks like it's here. And what is the problem then? Let me just quickly look under math. Vector 3, it returns a vector 3. Player, oh right, I spelt it wrong. So back under here, get position, we added di. Getting a little better, I hope. Get position is not a member of player. Okay, let's take a look to see what player has. We have no get position. So it looks like we're going to have to add this function. Let's actually double check to make sure that the player doesn't have get position underneath camera, because it is inherited. No, it doesn't. Okay, so let's add it into the camera then. Under get angle, we'll have vector 3 get position, and inside camera.cpp, just scroll down to the bottom and add it in here. Get position. Try building again. Okay, now inside of our code for our crouch, we need to go and replace all of this stuff to use those new variables that we've chosen to rename for the crouch and the crouch up. So I'm just going to highlight all of this and replace it with the new variables. So here you see we're using CS down and CS up instead. And give that a build. Okay, camera position cannot access private member. Okay, we're getting this error message because MV3 position, let's take a look at that. MV3 position right here is actually a private member of our camera class. So instead, let's move all of this stuff and put it underneath the protected section. So if it's protected, if you are inherited from camera, you have access to it, but it's still protected in the sense that if you're not inside this class, being camera, or anything inherited, then you can't access it. So it's similar to private, but with the addition that inherited classes are allowed to use them, which is what we need. So let's save that and give another build. Okay. So back inside GameOGL now, underneath the initialize, or inside the initialize section, we need to make some changes. Before we make this change here though, let's scroll up to just below GL shade model. Here we're selecting how we want our objects to be shaded, and then we're specifying our blending technique. Now, we've chosen here to use the color as the material for all of our objects. Well, once we finish implementing our scene graph, we're no longer going to be using color to specify how each of the objects are rendered. Instead, we're going to be using materials. So we need to go and disable this because we don't want to use that anymore. So taking that out, and underneath this, we're going to add the following line: GL enable, GL normalize. Now what this is going to do is anytime we have an object that has normals with it, it's going to normalize the normals to be unit length. And this is important because once we implement the scene graph, we start to lose control over how scaling happens directly, because we can specify a scale for an object, but if it's nested under a bunch of transforms, the scale of that object is going to depend on what it's nested under. So we don't want to go and try to figure out what is the total normal lengths for every object. Instead, we can enable this flag here, GL normalize, and OpenGL will automatically normalize everything for us. Now, if you forget to do this, what will happen is your objects will actually get brighter and dimmer as you scale them. If you notice that, that means you've forgotten to enable it. So make sure you go and enable this. It is a little bit of a performance hit, but for the headache that it saves, it's well worth just enabling the normalization functions here. Now we can scroll down here to the bottom to where we had set player's height above the ground. Well, we still need to do this, but we can no longer do it inside GameOGL because we don't have mPlayer anymore. So we can take this and paste it inside of our scene initialize. So let's go and right at the very top, just initialize our player eye height to be 0.5. Let's try building again. And some more changes. Inside our pre-render of our GameOGL, again, we're calling getAngleX and getAngleY, as well as the getPosition down here. So we're going to use our new functions that we just created for our player and use them to do the exact same thing. So let's just highlight all of this and replace it with the following. So here we're calling the scenes player getX, player getAngleX, player getAngleY. And then for the position, we just create a static member variable, a static local variable of a vector 3. We get the player's position, and then we use that position X, Y, and Z inside the GL translate F down here. Build it, and I think we're getting close. Oh, we got one more here. Scene does not have, oh, right, spelling mistake. Okay, built. Now let's see if it actually runs. And it does. Okay, so we successfully were able to move our player out of our GameOGL class and put him inside of our scene class. So come back for the next video tutorial, and we're going to start implementing our core functions that we're going to be using for our scene graph. Oh, wait a minute. I just noticed one last thing. Inside of our game OpenGL here, we have two render functions here, render triangles and render houses. We can delete these. We'll never use these ever again. So I'm just going to go and quickly delete them, and also inside of our code, render, let's see if we can find them. Here's the render triangle. Just highlight this one, and here's a render house. Highlight this one. Okay, we've deleted both of those. We don't need them. We're never going to use them again because rendering of the objects themselves is going to happen through the scene graph. So I just wanted to clean that up while we had the time. So if you find my video tutorials helpful and you'd like to support my website so that I can produce more and you can get more content, please click on the PayPal icon to send a donation to me, or you can also help me out by clicking on any of the Google ads found on the side. Keep the discussion boards busy. If you have any questions, feel free to send me questions directly through the community forum. Just click on here and take a look to see what other people are talking about inside the game development section.